Welcome to our first edition of the Central Great Lakes Chapters Centered on Excellence webinar series, as we bring you a panel of experts today to discuss an important topic. We're talking about informing our viewers and earning their trust in divisive and dangerous times. It's such an important topic at the heart of what we do, and we've got a great team assembled to talk about it tonight. Cheryl Jackson is a visiting lecturer at Indiana University and a former reporter at CNN and WRTV. Kevin Rader recently retired from WTHR, where he won 27 Emmys through the years as a political and feature reporter. Regan, the chief investigator at WEWS, where he's been honored many times by our chapter and recently inducted into the Silver Circle. And also from Northeast Ohio, Carolyn Robinson with the Solutions Journalism Network, where she's director of broadcast partnerships and also a former producer at CNN and Al Jazeera. I'm Dan Spieler from Fox 59 and CBS 4 in Indianapolis, and new chapter president for the Central Great Lakes. I'll be serving as our moderator tonight. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments. We're going to tackle a lot of topics, but first we want to get to our panel. And as we introduce each of you, I want to know what makes you proudest of your time in broadcast journalism. And Ron, as our recent Silver Circle inductee, I'll start with you because I understand you also have some pretty big news today as well.
Well, Dan, first, let me thank you for arranging all of this, because I think the topic is really vital, and my hat's off to you for taking this on. And I think it's a good thing for the chapter. Yes, the news, I announced earlier today that I am retiring. I'm joining Kevin and in retirement. Big decision for me, 46 years doing this, and 22 here at News 5 in Cleveland. So it was a big decision, but I think, Dan, you were asking us to kind of recap maybe a story that was particularly impactful, or one we felt at least was. And, I think that's a little difficult to do, but I think probably a report that we did that freed an innocent man from prison probably is at the top. I think when you, at the end of the day, this guy has been out now 10 years. He's a productive member of the community. He's a mentor to troubled teens. I'm still in weekly contact with Daryl, but he was accused of a murder that he didn't commit. And by the time I came along, and this was, I think he reached out from prison to me in 2004. And I will tell you, all of us have probably had somebody in prison who didn't do it, and they want us to get him off, right? And, you feel for them, but A, what's the likelihood, right? And B, I'm not an attorney, and the amount of research that you have to do for these is pretty uphill. So I honestly did. I put him off for months, and but cutting to the chase, we took it on, worked on it for I think 4 years before we got him a new trial, and then he was prosecution eventually dropped all the charges because it was shown that the evidence against him didn't point to him. It pointed to not to him. So that's probably it in a nutshell. So.
Well, you've done so much great work over the years. We see some of your awards behind you. We see your Associated Press awards. We would love to see the Emmys in the background because I know you have many of them.
Oh, would you? Well, I can actually do that. I get a lot of grief from people at work. I don't know if does any of that showing up? I can't.
There it is. Yes, there they are. Yes. And the Silver Circle as well. Well, it's
yeah. I've got all 33 of them up there, and it's but I will say, not one of those is me. Every one of them is people that really lifted my work up. This has little to do with me and everything to do with the people I've worked with, and I'm serious about that. Dead serious.
It's always a great team effort, but I can tell you, you've won 33 of them. You've done some amazing work throughout your career, and congratulations to you on a job well done as you announce your retirement. Congrats to you, and thank you for all the work you've done in Cleveland, and also, all the accomplishments that you've earned in our chapter. We're very proud to have you here in our region.
And Kevin is right behind me on that.
Kevin,
too, on that
you've won 27 Emmys. What are you most proud of in your time in broadcast journalism?
I feel horrible doing this, but I'm going to correct you because it's 32.
Oh, 32. It was on your bio.
Ron, I know, isn't that horrible? Ron beat me, and it's deserving because he
I
does
won.
work.
By one.
And so,
because Kevin, here's the thing: when we would sit at these things and we'd all work so hard, and every time I'd see your name, I'd go, "Oh, geez, it's over." But
the thing, Dan, that I would talk about is not necessarily a story. I don't have anything to compare to Ron. I mean, that's a fantastic, that's what media should do. I mean, you should be so proud of yourself. But the thing I think of with this business is just one little snippet moment of time. And it's after Governor Frank O'Bannon passed away here years ago. And I was instrumental in breaking that story. It was an unfortunate one. And we were at the funeral. And I'm just standing there covering the story when the First Lady, Judy O'Bannon, comes up to me and puts her hands on my cheeks and says, "You were always fair." That's what I think of. She didn't have to say anything.
Yeah.
And it still gets me.
Yeah.
Can't ask for more than that.
All right. It still gets me, but that's what I think of.
Well, I know you always found a way to get to the heart of every story you did, even in a sometimes cruel world like politics. You found a way to put the people first in your stories, and also got out of the world of politics quite a bit to tell some great feature stories about some amazing people across the state.
I'm sorry, getting emotional on that. It's just something that simmers with me.
Absolutely. That's at the heart of what we do. Cheryl, can you hear us now? Cheryl Jackson, at Indiana University. I know we had some Zoom troubles initially. I apologize for that.
It's not you. Actually, I have two computers up and I'm actually on my phone because I could get neither one of them to actually show my video. So I am here
to work. It's great to see you again. Cheryl and I used to work together many years back. Tell me a little bit about what you're proudest of during your time in broadcast journalism.
I loved working in news, and I loved, when I finally went to CNN, I covered a story in a historic Black cemetery in Chicago where many of the graves had been resold, and several famous Black people like Emmett Till, their bodies had been moved around in the graves, and we were able to expose that and help people to find their loved ones who, really had been moved around. And I think just the idea of exposing injustice, those are the stories that excited me. I know when I was working in Indianapolis, one of our stories, they used our video to convict a man who was a child molester, and his mother actually her words are the ones that, put him in jail ultimately. And it was very satisfying. They, subpoenaed our tape, and she basically put him in the middle of that crime, and he went to jail for it. But I have to say also, teaching students and just watching them go out into the world. And I look at my students, and they're, one of my students from China actually was the only English speaking student, a person in Wuhan. So he did 100 live shots around the world in the beginning days of being in Wuhan for COVID-19. And he was a guy who told me, "I don't need your live shot class. I'm going to do documentaries." And then I walked by and saw him on MSNBC. So just seeing my students out there really doing work, interviewing presidents and, important people and people who are struggling with poverty, all those things, it makes me very proud.
You've seen it from both sides now as a journalist and an educator. That's really rewarding. Carolyn, what are you most proud of during your time in broadcast journalism, and also now approaching it from a different focus?
Right. Yeah. And I have to say, my gosh, I'm bringing up the tail end of this group. I don't know how I'm going to be able to match any of this here, but I'm thinking, and just kind of to echo what Cheryl's been saying too, is that I've had the privilege to travel and to be working in as a journalist and an educator in many, many different places. And I've seen journalists and how much they care in such difficult situations, that really is humbling and inspiring. I worked in places like East Timor and the Middle East and Eastern Europe and Africa and many places. And I've struck over and over and over again by this calling that people have, that they need to tell the story despite all odds. And I mean, sometimes I just think about, you know, the situation that we face in the United States that compares with others, places that are, you know, just out there doing it. And it's just been very, very rewarding on that front. But to bring it up to the moment, the last several years I've been working at Solutions Journalism Network. And in this regard, I've had the opportunity to watch and to help journalists shifting their perspectives somewhat so that they can embrace what's working as well as to focus on what the problems are. And that shift really lights people up in a way that I didn't expect. And I'm just always excited to see that when it happens. So I guess that's some of it.
I think we're going to get into that quite a bit tonight as well. Again, our topic tonight is informing our viewers and earning their trust in divisive and dangerous times. And so when we talk about earning their trust, you know, we can't ignore some of the recent polling that's been done about our industry. We're going to talk about that here tonight. There's good news and there's bad news. And so we'll start with some of the bad news here. This is a recent poll from Gallup that shows that overall Americans' trust in mass media is the lowest it's been since 2016. And you can see how that number has changed through the years, but now at 36% in 2021, according to this poll. But it is a better story for local news. And so we want to point that out because obviously so many of our members are in local news or our students who are thinking about going into local news. And you can see how those numbers are different. This lighter blue number is national news. This is a poll from Statista, the share of adults who trust national news or local news to tell the truth in the United States over the last 5 years. You can see how that number in terms of national news has gone down to 58%, but still 75%, down from 82, but still 75% of people in this poll trusting local news to tell the truth in the United States. And this recent poll from Pointer breaks that down in terms of different types of media and shows that while 55% of people in this poll trust network TV news, 59% trust their national newspaper, 73% trust their local newspaper, local TV news still among the highest there in terms of trust, with 76% of people in this poll who do trust their local TV news. Cheryl, you have worked both in local news and also in national news. What do you make of those numbers and why there's such a difference there?
I think I do see the difference. You know, when I left Channel 6 in Indianapolis, where, you know, we were first taught, you know, to make sure that we're not spinning the story in either direction, that our bias was not available for the viewers to see. I think my first live shots at CNN, where an anchor sometimes would come to me in a way that was sort of like, oh my gosh, Cheryl, what's happening out there? You know, and it just raises your energy, and you're trying to be biased, and you might work with 5 or 6 different anchors and they come with different energy, and it's a little bit more difficult to be kind of straight through the news. And so I do think that, you know, we know that network news, you know, some lean right, some lean left. And I do think that local news is still trying to hold that balance of, you know, we're unbiased. I'm still teaching my students, we're not there to give our opinion. No one should know our opinion. Of course, I think one thing that's good about the way things have changed a bit is, I mean, if something's heartbreaking and someone sheds a tear on air, I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. And back in the day, we were doing everything we could not to shed a tear if there was a terrible story. But I do think that network news, you're doing sometimes 14 live shots, you know, a day. And so it becomes a little more elevated to spin it a bit. And so that's what it felt like to me anyway.
Carolyn, you've also spent time working with national and local organizations. What do you see looking at those numbers?
Yeah, it's really is interesting. I've spent a lot of time working with local news and seeing that connection with the community. There's just a much more visceral kind of feeling between the audience and the viewers. They're in the neighborhood, they're in the community, they're out and about, they're familiar things. And there's a great striving, as everybody on this call can attest to connect with that community and to bring news that's relevant and important to that community. And I think people feel that. It's kind of simple, but that's what I've noticed.
Kevin, a lot of the angst around the media does seem to intersect with the angst in our nation's politics. It's been a year now since the 2020 election, nearly a year since the events of January 6th. You covered politics for so many years. What's different now in this day and age that we're all living through?
Well, I remember when I retired, I'll go with two things on this. When I retired, I got several emails from people saying they were trying all these years to determine where I was politically. And they said that they could not figure it out. And that to me was I felt very good about that. On the other hand, Dan, I know because you were out there too, you'd go to some of these Trump rallies when he was campaigning when he was candidate Trump. And there was this angst that you would feel in the crowd, except the crowd, when you're a local reporter, would talk to you as they're walking in. They'd say, "Hey, Kevin, how are you?" "Oh, I'm good. I'm good." And then the speech would start and all the venom would come out. And I thought it was kind of like all-star wrestling is what I thought about at first, because then they would leave and they'd say, "Oh, bye, Kevin. Are you going home tonight?" "Yeah, I'm going home tonight." Well, then everything changed with the attack on the Capitol. All of a sudden now you're thinking, it's too far. You can yell, you can scream. I'm okay with that. As a reporter, that's okay. I don't mind being in a situation that, I'm still going to report the facts. I'm still going to do my job. It doesn't matter whether you're yelling at me or not. And I'll take that and put it in the story, but continue on. But with the attack on the Capitol, everything kind of changed. I was talking to someone in radio, believe it or not, who owns a number of radio stations just this week, who was saying they wanted to start a political talk show, and then hesitated because of the climate. That hurt me. I was like, no, don't hesitate. You're needed now more than ever. Don't back away, jump in. And I'm sensing some fear out there now of against our industry, of even some of those in the industry, of not wanting to upset the apple cart.
And yet, more than ever, facts matter. Getting the truth out to people matters. Ron, your reaction to that, and in light of all of that, how do we rebuild trust at a time where people kind of want to seem to believe what they want to believe, and whether that's about the pandemic or about our politics? How do we work to better prioritize factual information over any misinformation that's out there?
Dan, I think we are really at a crisis level, I think, in journalism. And I do think, to your point on investigative journalism, I think it's more incumbent on us and those who do this as a living to really pursue those facts and not to be deterred. And some, for instances, it's become so widespread for not only political candidates, but trickles all the way down to local mayors to basically create their own alternative truths. We've tried to fight that here. A number of stations and my colleagues around the country have initiated transparency stories, where you kind of hold accountability, and we've tried to do that. To the best we can. In fact, in one case here, I got so tired of the mayor of Cleveland not even doing interviews with us, but preferring to hold these Facebook episodes where no one can question him. So we did something which I think I bet every one of us out there has thought about this, the proliferation of PIOs in city government and state government. Everybody has a PIO. And so we decided to add up the salaries for all of these PIOs, and then to go over with our cell phone outside their offices down out on the street and call them and see if we could get them to do an interview with us. Nobody would do an interview. Everyone sent us to the mayor's office to get approval. before anybody says anything. And so we tallied that up with how much money taxpayers are spending and how little information you're actually getting back. Another example was we did something recently on mail thefts. And the Postal Service actually told me after repeated FOIAs that we do not track mail thefts. And my head was spinning because I knew that wasn't true. So I reminded them, I said, we're going to do a story and we're going to quote you as saying you don't track. And sure enough, we got sources and we got the information we needed, and we found that mail thefts are skyrocketing in this country. But that's the kind of thing that is happening. Organizations feel that they can create their own truth. And we have to be incredibly vigilant on this and to really, really hold them accountable.
And Cheryl, obviously, this is something a lot of students must be thinking about as well as they enter journalism and hear about these terms and this concept of a post-truth society. As Ron got into there, people trying to spin their own truth. And we're in a business where we're trying to get to the facts and get to the truth. What are you telling students about this? What are they telling you about their concerns, their hopes, and their fears for entering a business like ours at a time like this?
I tell them very clearly that when there is official misconduct, the only answer is probably the press, the media being willing to tell a true story, not to spin it so that they are pointing something out that's not happening. But if there is official misconduct, a chance for justice, a chance for truth, a chance for equality that is in the hands of officials, the media is the only answer to the truth. And so I tell them, be careful with your reputation. You know, this isn't you have to, what they're telling me sometimes is that they think this is a little bit sort of Hollywood and a little bit of media. And I'm saying to them, no, because when you get to that moment where you have an opportunity to tell a story that either gets someone free from prison or gets someone justice, you don't want to have a reputation where you've spun the truth or you've played with the truth or you've moved things around. And then you may know I have my own kind of issue with justice for my brother. And I'm so thankful that in this fight for justice for him, that I have a reputation where I have not spun the truth, that I have told the truth. I've been a good reporter, those kind of things. And so I remind them that your reputation starts now, and don't confuse this. You're not in Hollywood. This is about truth.
Yeah, it's about getting to the facts. Kevin, I want to ask you about something we've seen some news organizations do. We've seen some outlets try to deal with this sort of thing by essentially spending less time listening to people or quoting people who might also be trying to spread misinformation. We've seen some cable outlets take that approach. This article here talks about the Cleveland Plain Dealer recently saying they're going to, quote, completely ignore politicians' false statements and stunts, citing former President Trump's claims about the election. They also cite former Democratic Mayor of Cleveland, Dennis Kucinich, who recently ran for mayor again. He had a controversial ad that made a lot of news, but the Plain Dealer said this was an example of something they weren't going to amplify. What do you make of that approach?
I look at that maybe a little bit differently. I don't know. I hesitate. Do you want to report something that's not true? Clearly not. But it's also part of your responsibility to show why it's not true. And because those statements are going to get out somewhere. And I feel like that's kind of what we're getting into Ron's bailiwick a little bit here. When you do some investigative work, or you'd be able to come out and say, you know what, this is wrong. Here is the correct fact on this. And I think it's our responsibility to do that. I don't know if avoidance is the answer. I really don't know, because I fear that some people are going to be picky about who they want to interview about a story then. And I always believe you should do both sides, even if you feel like one is wrong. People need to know that that's wrong, and that should be in your story. I'd love to hear what other people think about that.
Oh, I think I think you've really hit on something, because, you know, we are being scrutinized so much in terms of whose voice we are reporting and who has access to us. And it's such a fine line right now that, you know, I understand where the Plain Dealer is coming from. But I think that, Kevin, you may have hit on something which I would agree with, that I think we can report that, but we can show why it is not true, why that is not accurate. Because I think we do run, we can run into trouble with every viewer who may feel that we are not willing to report something.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that we can go completely in that direction. There's kind of a censorship issue here that in our little bubble, in our newsroom, we're going to decide ourselves. And I think that can be really dangerous. And it leads to a question that I get a lot that I never got 46 years ago. And people actually ask me with a straight face. Now, when you guys get together in the morning, you pretty much decide what slant you're going to take, right? What angle, what how you're going to slant it. And when these questions first came up, I thought, is this a joke? And they're being serious. They have no idea how we actually function, which brings me to a really important issue. Maybe we should save it for later, but Cheryl, what you're doing is so vital. Journalism, education, and it needs to start in high school. It might need to start in elementary school, because we are growing a society of voters and participants who don't have a clue as to what it is that we do, what is responsible journalism, what is the First Amendment? Is it a license to print money? Is it to make a, they think that we're a business to make money, because
I think not to interrupt.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm hearing you, but I want to interject something if I can. And that's that our job is to report every viewpoint and let the people decide.
Yeah.
Be fair, be factual, and present every side, and the viewer will decide.
Yes, I hope I stated that correctly. That was what I was agreeing with.
Does finding balance and finding truth sometimes conflict? I guess that may be the question some are asking these days. Cheryl, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, so I agree so strongly with both of them. And also I use it as an example in my classroom about, I reported in Indiana where I have actually interviewed people in the KKK or in skinheads or whatever. And I have actually interviewed them. And at times, one of them even using the N-word. And so I said to them, I am happy to report this. And I know that seems out of balance, but I'm happy to report this because as a person of color, I have experienced some of this. And so if I have an opportunity to show you someone who may never see that, I want you to see this other side. And so while I do think Kevin's right, we have to have some kind of balance, because I'm not going to allow them to recruit on my air, but I also want people to see this exists. And I think the other thing that Ron was kind of talking about that I agreed with is sort of the idea that the media, that we somehow all come together and decide to conspire to tell the truth. And that's why diversity in the newsroom is so important, is because we go out and we tell the story and we use our own lives to tell the truth of the story. And sometimes that's different. And so the idea that the media conspires when we're all diverse from all over the place, it just offends me so much that people think that we are coming together and coming to plan.
Carolyn, I want to get to you as well. Before we wrap up this portion of the conversation, feel free to add any thoughts about what we've been discussing here, but I also want to talk about what your organization is doing to encourage journalists to focus on solutions-oriented reporting. And this is something that your research shows is working when it comes to building trust.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I'm listening to these stories and I know how hard it is to be in the middle of all this. And I'm doing something slightly different. I'm at one step removed. We support journalists. We support newsrooms. And how can we help them? And I'm thinking about a very interesting project that we're working on. I get to experiment with these kind of things. It's called Complicating the Narratives. And it was the basic gist of it is, are there conflict resolution techniques that can be distilled into a form that we journalists can use in our interviews, in our story gathering, being mindful of this polarization in society, and at what point, not trying to solve a problem or a conflict, but in order to dance around the edges of it and go into the middle of it without creating any more polarization. So this is a really interesting project we have. We've been training newsrooms all over with this, and it involves a technique of active listening called looping, which, we all think we listen. I'm a journalist. I listen to things all day long, but sometimes we don't listen as well as we think we do. And it's looping back and saying, okay, I'm hearing you say this. Is this what you're saying? And people say, actually, no, I didn't mean that at all. And just kind of going one step deeper below these conversations. So we've seen some really interesting reporting coming out on this front. It's really interesting to put into practice. It's slightly different than going out there and trying to report the facts on a daily basis, which is really, challenging in this environment.
Well, I know you have some slides here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what solutions journalism is all about?
Sure. And I don't know if you want to play the video at some point, but yeah, this is it in a nutshell. We're not fluff. We're not happy news or anything like that. We simply are investigating solutions. And so for that, we need evidence. We need to talk about limitations, what's working, to what degree, how much, for how long, for whom, very importantly. And that's it, really, in a nutshell. We have 4 pillars, which are these that we use to people. It has to have a response to a problem, details and insights on how it works. Very importantly, we need to show some evidence of what's working and to what degree. And it's not just plans or intentions or a task force or an expert recommending something. What's actually working on the ground? And then talk about drawbacks. Nothing's perfect. So there's no 100% solution to a problem. So we need to put that in there to make it credible journalism, to avoid hype and make it so it's not fluff. That's it, really. And we have in our story tracker, we have over 12,000 stories that have been vetted by our specialists for these 4 criteria from all over the world of things that are working, which I recommend if you're having a bad day, just go through that. And these are not light stories either. This is police reform, criminal injustice, climate change. It's a serious focus on the news. This is what we've been doing in television. I've been working with many stations since I started at WWS with Ron, very first station. We moved on to working with various stations on collaborative projects, KXAN in Austin, and then moving on to ownership groups, Next Star, which was doing a nationwide project around solutions, pandemic pass or fail solutions for education equity. And this year I've been working with these ownership groups, Scripps, Gray, Graham, and Univision, and more coming next year. This is what I really wanted to highlight because we had Smith Geiger we commissioned Smith Geiger to ask, what do viewers think about solutions journalism? There are 6 markets, 600 plus viewers. They found, it surprised all of us, all demographics across partisan lines want more solutions stories. Solutions coverage differentiates stations, builds brand affinity. Ron, I know, did some stories. He's in our tracker for solutions coverage stories on urban blight when we worked together. And the most interesting thing I think I found in this is that cross-market solutions perform as well as or better than in-market problem stories. In other words, people may not care about the problems that other people are facing in other markets, but they sure are interested in about things that are working. And so if we can report this responsibly with the credibility that we have as journalists, looking critically, analyzing critically the solution, is it working, to what degree, how much, for how long, how much does it cost, et cetera. I think we've got something here. And Seth Geiger, one of the co-founders, said this is about as good as it gets in terms of the efficacy of defining a particular approach. So we were heartened by that, and happy to talk with anybody out there who's interested to learn more too.
Yeah, Ron, your station has used this solutions-based approach in some of your work, that Better Land series that Carolyn mentioned. How has this worked, not just in theory, but in practice?
Well, it was really effective, and we were grateful for the partnership on this. I personally did some work Cleveland was kind of at the forefront of foreclosure crisis, and Carolyn mentioned the blight. And we're able to take a look at what organizations like land banks were doing, how effective were they, what could be done. And it really added a layer of depth to our reporting that we hadn't approached in exactly that way before. So, I think that was a payoff to that.
Cheryl, you were part of a panel of IU alumni this week. I saw on social media talking about diversity in media, and we're going to have an entire session on that early next year. But I also want to get your thoughts on one of the key aspects of solutions journalism that has been mentioned: the need to highlight things that are working well within our communities of color or communities that are experiencing poverty. How important is that right now for our industry?
Very important. And I just loved that whole presentation. I mean, I'd like to be involved in somehow, because I think that, I think that diversity in the newsroom, I grew up in Columbus, Indiana, where, I wrote a column at our newspaper, and I was the only person of color in the newsroom. And I considered it sort of my job to kind of be able to bridge a gap sometimes. And so I think that what I try to teach students is that, we kind of there are some places we go where we have a little easier access. If I go into a neighborhood where people look like me, and I learned this in Indianapolis, actually, because remember, Indianapolis was really the first market where, it was the second market where I was on television, but I had been a newspaper reporter. And I realized there were times when we would go in certain neighborhoods that I would just walk in and start talking to people, and other people maybe wouldn't. And then there are times when it's not that easy for me to walk right in. And so we have this privilege in some ways, and in other ways we have to work harder to get the story. And so I tell them, I think it's fine to use that privilege to get into the room or to get into the space, but we also have to be able to tell the stories of all people. But diversity in the newsroom, I think, is just, it's so important, because it's important in life. When we're talking about the missing girl, Gabby Petito, that was found dead, and we talk about missing white girl syndrome, and we realize that, here's how I feel about that. I feel that the newsroom, if the majority of the people in the newsroom are white, they just see Gabby as a missing girl who could be their niece, their sister, their friend. And it's not necessarily that they're making this decision to exclude people of color when they're missing. But if I'm in the newsroom and a person of color is missing, I say to myself, that could be my niece, my sister, my friend. So that's why that balance is necessary, because that way we don't have that sort of, the missing white girl syndrome, which for people who don't know, is where television focuses on a young white woman who's missing, and maybe there may be indigenous or women of color missing 10 times, in numbers 10 times, who don't show up on television. I don't think it's deliberate necessarily. I think it's, when you don't have diversity in the newsroom, you see what you see, and we all have bias. We have to learn to negotiate it. And so that's the other thing I teach my students. We all walk around with bias, and we have to figure out, because we can't live with it. We can't laugh at jokes that are about people who are living in situations like around prejudice situations, because we are supposed to be a vessel that tells the truth. So when our bias shows up, we have to figure out how to eliminate it. And so that's what I tell them. And I don't want them to feel guilty about having bias, because it's showed up in my own life before. But being in the newsroom, it's a dance, it's not a fight. We just show up and go, hey, have you thought of this? Maybe you didn't see it this way, or maybe I didn't see it the way you saw it. And let's be a team,
And Carolyn, you pointed out your research shows, this could help, build trust among viewers. Is there room, Kevin, do you think, for this kind of solutions-based approach in political journalism today, or is there just too much noise for this kind of reporting to break through right now?
No, I think there is room for that. I think, to add one little thing to this, I think something that actually benefited me doing politics was pointed out, Dan, when you introduced me, is they allowed me to break free and tell stories about people. Just get out and talk to people. And somehow I think that benefited me when it came time to do politics, because people followed me over to the politics then, and vice versa. And it's an odd pairing. And I would say maybe it's not going to work for everybody, but it definitely worked for me. And it allowed me to build credibility with people. You know, there was an old saying that I heard once in church from the pastor: people don't care what you know until they know that you care. It's basically that simple. And if they feel that from you, they're going to stay with you and they'll trust you. But if you don't, and if you don't, in my case anyway, I did feel like if I wouldn't have had that, I wouldn't have had the career that I had. So it's an odd pairing, but just something I bring up.
Well said. Always focus on the people, right? I mean, that's such a big lesson in journalism. Let's take the same sort of solutions-minded focus for a moment and apply it to our industry broadly here. What's working well right now in local TV news that we need to do more of? Ron, I'll start with you in terms of investigative journalism. What's working well? What do you want to see us all do more of in this industry?
Well, I think one of the main things that we actually really need to work extremely hard at is making sure that our local politicians don't follow down this road where they feel that they do not need to speak with us. This has been a trend that I have seen for a long time, but probably exacerbated in the last 6 or 7 years. That they don't need to speak with us, and they don't need to return calls. And I think that we need to hold every one of these elected officials the accountability. And I think we need to just put that first and foremost, because it is stunning to me how cavalier even small town mayors are getting, that they just don't need to talk to us because they have some perceived mistrust, and that they think that the public has really bought into this fake news thing. And so when you have politicians talking about fake news on a local level, it's very scary to me. So that's where I think the accountability is number one. Dan, I really believe that.
Cheryl, what do you believe is working well right now in our industry, and what do we need to do more of in that regard?
I think that local news, people just learn to trust the people that tell them the truth every day, and I think that most of my students, that's the path they take. They start in local news, and I'm very proud of their journeys. I don't see them doing a lot of spin on the news or anything like that. But I do think that the thing about this fake news is that there are people who just do not understand that there really are fake news outlets that are spinning things as well. And so we are competing with, I think that's causing the confusion, so that people don't know what the truth is. And, I try to stay on my social media because I see it so much in my hometown. People are like, why didn't anybody report this? And I say, Google it one time. If no major news outlet covered it, if not one other major news outlet covered it, it didn't happen. But I think people are ignorant of that. And so with all the confusion of the actual fake news, they have imagined that everything is a conspiracy and that we are all working together to confuse people. And so local news, though, I love local news in that you do build relationships with people. People come to trust you because you are telling them the truth every day. And I think that's why the high rating of trust, just good people with good personalities that meet the people in the streets.
And we've certainly, you mentioned misinformation that's out there. We've certainly seen the impacts of that throughout this pandemic that we've all been living through. Certainly that by any standard has been harmful in a lot of different ways. Carolyn, when it comes to solutions journalism, what about covering COVID? What have you seen out there in terms of the approach your organization has encouraged? What kinds of stories have worked well in terms of finding solutions relating to this pandemic?
Right. I had it briefly on the screen for one of the slides last year when we worked with Nexstar, and they wanted to do a collaborative approach across 15 of their stations, and we supported them with part-time positions for solutions journalists. And they focused on Pandemic Pass or Fail, Solutions for Education Equity. So looking at that, what was working in the specific realm of education and equality and equity in that realm. And they came up with something like 50 stories altogether over a period of, I think it was about 3 months. And these were sourced across all of the different stations in the group. And then they had associated town halls and other kinds of activities on Facebook, including some in Spanish, which made sense in a lot of ways as well. And they told us that the aggregate Facebook views were something like 2.5 million, which they were themselves surprised because they said that's the numbers we get with politics or breaking news or something else. So for education stories to have that much, in aggregate for all of those views, they were thoroughly pleased. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, Ron, Kevin, as we start to wrap things up here, I want to get some final thoughts from you as well. What you're hoping for in the future of our industry, and as we talk about the effects that people relying on bad information, what that can lead to, as we've seen over the last few years. What do you hope our industry is able to do to have people, again, build trust in common factual information that society as a whole can trust and lean on during difficult times?
Well, I think several of us have said tonight across the board that, how we carry ourselves is extremely important. I've always bristled. I've been doing investigative reporting for decades. And the guys that do it really well don't come into it with a big sword and riding in on the First Amendment, and they're just going to take you down. That kind of style of gotcha and questions, which just really sound like you have a bias. The questions we need to be asking when we ask these questions help my viewers understand why did this happen, and that ought to be the theme of everything. We ought to be going for the why, and that's in everything that we do. It just can't be this happened, that happened. It has to be the why. But we also, I think, have to be really mindful that we are being scrutinized, and I think we have to carry ourselves in a very professional way. In a way that, as Kevin pointed out, no one knew where in the world he was on a political spectrum. And that speaks highly of him because of the way he carried himself. And that's why he was so successful. And viewers benefited from his work from that. So that's, there really needs to be some discussion, I think, among young journalists. And Cheryl, you're doing this, but we are not, we should not be riding into these arenas and into these news conferences and one-on-one interviews with any appearance that we have an agenda. That's just not it. And I see it happen, and I see young investigative journalists somehow think that makes them look, I don't know what the right word is, tough. We don't have to be tough. Our work should be tough. We don't have to go in there and be some kind of bully.
Well said.
I call that paparazzi journalism, where you want to go and go, why did you do it? Why did you, that whole thing, that's, it's for Hollywood. It's not for what we're doing.
Exactly.
It's almost like the camera's been flipped. You've moved it from the person you're interviewing back to you. And I've never been in favor of that. Most of my stories I never even appeared in, just because I didn't like that. I wanted to tell that story, not my story. But I will add one more thing on this, is I think in the future, when you were asking Dan about that, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget it, just remain steadfast, don't back down, keep doing our jobs. I just feel like it's more important now just to be steadfast and keep going.
Amen. Yep.
Said. Anyone else? Final thoughts?
I agree with that so strongly, and I do believe that young journalists are a little confused about what the job is, and so I think when they get to your stations and they get there, you have to keep reminding them this is about truth.
Yeah.
Well said. I want to thank our panel, thank everyone who's been able to watch, and everyone who will be watching it later in classes and whatnot in the days and weeks to come. I also want to remind all our members, all the great work you've been doing this past year. Our call for entry opens up December 1st, and we'll have all of that on our website at greatlakesemmies.tv. We're going to be holding more of these sessions too. December 8th, a week after our call for entries opens up, we'll be talking about award-winning writing and producing. And then in January, we'll be focusing on, again, earning an Emmy, superb storytelling and journalism that matters. We'll be discussing covering our communities, the importance of inclusion and diversity in February. Then in March, surviving and thriving, making TV magic in the midst of the pandemic. And in April, surviving and thriving, preparing for your first job or your next job. As we launch this webinar series for our student and professional members, we want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to our panel. You guys were great. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
So much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you
for
all.
inviting us.
Thank you for
Thanks
having us.
everybody for watching. Have a good night.